Hello? Guys, good to see every single one of you. Each week we start by welcoming our crew that is watching on video. Whether you're hanging out with us in Kenosha today, Racine today, you are listening online, watching online, well, we love all of you, and we are grateful that you are part of the Great Lakes Church family. So I want to start today by highlighting something that we're doing this summer in the third week of July. All right, big deal, third week of July. And it's something called Summer Jam, right? And it is for our K through fifth grade kids. So the best way to describe this is it is a day camp with a type of experience, right? With different competitions, arts and crafts, water wars, all types of fun stuff. And our kids in K through third grade, it's gonna be 3 days. From 8:30 till noon, our kids in fourth and fifth grade, it's gonna be an overnight event. And you can learn about what's happening at greatlakechurch.com. That's our website. You can learn about things there and just go to the events page, all right? But here's the deal. In order to create the kind of experience that we want our kids to have, it is going to require 60 or 70 volunteers. We're going to need volunteers to set up before the camp, volunteers to take down things after the camp, volunteers to help with food, with tech, with safety, with video, volunteers to step in as small group leaders. And so I'm going to ask you to consider investing a couple hours of your summer, or if you're able to, a couple days of your summer, third week of July, to help us pour into the next generation, help us create amazing experiences for them that point them to Jesus in ways that also help them connect with other kids their age, all right? And so if you're watching at one of our physical locations, you can indicate your interest by using your connection card, which is yellow on one side. That's the side you typically see, but you throw your name on there, email on there, your phone number on there, and then literally anywhere on the card, you can put Summer Jam volunteer, Kids Jam volunteer. You can just indicate that. And what we'll do is we'll send you a link with the information and the various positions that we have. Now, what would be really easy, and we can skip this all together, because by the way, if you fill this out, just put this into one of the silver bins or silver giving stations located throughout our buildings. But if you just want to make it super easy, you can go directly to this website, all right? greatlakechurch.com/kidsjamvolunteers. You're not going to find that on the homepage. You literally will have to type these words in there, Kids Jam Volunteers, and you will see, again, the different opportunities we have, and you can sign up right there on that page. But it is going to take a whole bunch of people to collectively work together to give our kids what they deserve and certainly what they need this summer. Now, I am guessing that all of us have heard the phrase before, you're only as good as your last performance, right? If you're a coach, you're only as good as your last season. If you're an author, you're only as good as your last book, your last article. If you're a movie star, then you're only as good as your last movie. If you're in sales, you're going to be as good as your last quarter. If you're a company, you're going to be as good as your last product. In other words, and this is true of all of us, it's just human nature, we are being judged by not by our collective wins in life. We're not being judged by all the successes we've had throughout the years. We are being judged by our most recent wins and our most recent successes. We are loved, we are accepted, we are promoted as long as we keep performing. And we're guilty of doing this to other people, right? We judge them based on how they've been doing recently. So in 2002, Amanda Bynes was 16 years old. She was one of the biggest stars in the world. And then she started struggling with substance abuse and some legal issues. And over the course of several years, she started losing opportunities and slowly faded from the headlines. Why? Because you're only as good as your last performance. 20 years ago, BlackBerry dominated the smartphone market, right? Everybody had to have one of these things. It was the first company to be able to direct your email to your phone. It was revolutionary technology. But then they stopped innovating. And the BlackBerry was absolutely crushed by the iPhone. Yeah, nobody owns a BlackBerry anymore. You're only as good as your last performance. Back in 2013, the Cavs picked up Anthony Bennett. It was their #1 draft pick. Just 52 games later, they decided he's not performing. We're going to trade him to the Timberwolves. He didn't last long in the NBA. He started playing for teams overseas and is currently playing for a team in Taiwan. You are only as good as your last performance. It is the reality of life. People are always going to expect something from you. They're always going to want something from you. Your employer, as amazing as your employer may be, is inevitably going to care about what you've been doing lately. So you have a bad performance review, you could say, but last year, 2 years ago, I was on top of the world. And they're going to say, that's great, but I'm paying you for what you're doing right now. Performance is a big deal. Right now, we are in a teaching series called Just Jesus. And what we're doing is we're shining the spotlight on Jesus. We're talking about Jesus all summer long. And the goal of this series is that each of us would come to know and experience Jesus in such a real and meaningful and impactful way that regardless of how we feel Jesus is doing for us, right? And what Jesus has done for us lately. Has he answered our prayer? Has he provided for us the way we want him to provide for us? Has he done what we've desperately wanted for him to do? That regardless of what we feel Jesus has done for us, we're going to still follow him, still be devoted to him, still be changed and transformed by him because we are wowed by him. And this is what happened to followers of Jesus in the first century. And we know this because John, who was one of the disciples of Jesus, he gets to the end of his life, and his life has been so impacted by Jesus that he feels compelled to document and record many of the things he had seen with his own eyes and heard with his own ears. So he decides he's going to record some of the teachings of Jesus, some of the interactions of Jesus. He's going to write down and record for people the miracles of Jesus. And when I say write down, it's likely because he was older and 80, 90 years old. He hadn't been educated. He was a fisherman that he would have dictated to a scribe. But he writes this book, and he gets to the end of the book, and he wants people to know that this book doesn't even come close to capturing everything about Jesus. Here's what he says. He says, the disciples saw Jesus do many other miraculous signs in addition to the ones recorded in this book. John says, hey, those of us who were disciples, we had a front row seat to the miracles of Jesus. We were eyewitnesses to the things that Jesus did, and we were so marked by the things that we heard with our own ears and saw with our own eyes that each of us individually came to the conclusion that there is more to Jesus than him being just Mr. Nice Guy. Jesus is more than someone just walking around, shaking hands, kissing babies, and doing random acts of kindness. Jesus is more than a magician who can do some pretty cool things. Each of us, he says, individually came to the conclusion that Jesus was God in the flesh, and we ended up believing in Jesus because of what we had seen and what we had heard. And then he kind of pulls back the curtain and he lets his readers know the purpose of his book. Here's what he continues writing. He says, but these are written, these things that I've recorded and documented, they're written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing in him, you will have life by the power of his name. John says, full disclosure here, I'm letting you know the reason I'm writing this book. The reason I've taken a time to document everything I've been an eyewitness to, or some of the things I've been an eyewitness to, is I am hoping that just like I have put my faith in Jesus, you will put your faith in Jesus. Just like I have found life in Jesus, I'm hoping you find life in Jesus. Meaningful life, purposeful life, true life. Now, ultimately, that's what we all want. We want a meaningful and purposeful life. And John says every story that I've documented, and many, many, many stories that I did not document, it's meant to point you to Jesus. And so what I want to do with the rest of the time we have today is I want to look at one of the stories John documented that points us to Jesus. And it's a story in which Jesus performs a miracle. Now, I got to tell you, and I'm really big on saying this every time we talk about miracles and things like this. Anytime we read about a miracle, I have tension inside of me. And the reason I have a tension is because I'm an adult. Right? When I was 6 or 7 years old and I would hear Bible stories as a kid, and I would sit in something like a Sunday school with other kids learning about Jesus. When I would hear about a miracle, my eyes would get real wide. I'd be like, wow, that's amazing. And I totally believed it. But now I'm an adult, so I've got questions and doubts and tensions. Because just the way I'm wired, if something cannot be explained through science or reasoning, it's just hard for me to accept it. And then in addition to that, and I acknowledge this, I deal with cynicism a lot. Because over my lifetime, I've seen a lot of things that just to me are bizarre. And I feel like, especially when it comes to miracles, that people like to shut off their minds and just want to accept as something that's psychologically, it's like, I want to believe that's true. And so we just come to believe, things that, and that wasn't a real miracle, but I want to convince myself it was. Right? So back in the late 70s, there was a lady, Maria Rubio of Lake Arthur, New Mexico. She was frying tortillas in her kitchen, and she noticed that one of them seemed to have the likeness of a face etched in the burn marks. All right, so this is the tortilla shell, and this face is like 1 inch by 1 inch, and she just believed that it was the face of, of course, she believed it was Jesus. And her family agrees with her, so she ends up building a shrine to their tortilla. And this was a big deal. It made the news. You got the shrine down here, right? This is a really, really big thing. Well, ends up thousands and thousands of people started visiting the shrine of the miracle tortilla. They also concluded, so many people visiting, that, yes, that is a miracle. And she was interviewed over the years by so many different outlets. And one of the interviews by the Chicago Tribune, she actually says, I do not know why this has happened to me, but God has come into my life through this tortilla. Now, I've definitely met God in Taco Bell a time or two, all right? But this is ridiculous. The crazy thing is, you could actually go visit this shrine for almost 30 years, all right? But why you can't visit it today is back in 2005, Maria's granddaughter brought this tortilla and this glass enclosure and everything, brought it for show and tell to her class, and she dropped it, and the tortilla shell had been, hardened, and by that time it had dropped and broken, and so they closed the shrine. Right? My favorite part of this whole story is that at this point, when the shrine had moved from the living room to a shed out back. This is the holy shrine that they would go visit. Just ridiculous, right? But I bring this up because, come on, I know the temptation. If you're wired in any way like me and you're an adult thinking, and you've got similar personality, anytime a miracle is referenced, even if it's something in the Bible, there's just this tendency to kind of shut off our brains or go into cynicism mode. But I want us to guard our hearts. Because if you believe that there is a God who created this universe, hung the stars into the place, right? Created the different galaxies, put together this world the way he did. If you believe that there's a God behind all this, it is not a big leap to believe that God is capable of doing something that does not follow the law of physics from time to time. And so the story we're looking at today, it starts out in the city of Jerusalem, right? When you look at a map of Israel, it's an oblong-shaped state, and you'll notice that the city of Jerusalem is to the west here of the Dead Sea. And so the story starts out here, and what happens is Jesus decides to leave Jerusalem. He gathers up his disciples, and they take a 6 or 7 day journey to the Sea of Galilee. They get to Galilee, they get in a boat, and they go to the most northern part of the Sea of Galilee. All right, it's about 100 miles from Jerusalem. Very, very remote. All right, and it's this hill that overlooks the Sea of Galilee. This is where Jesus is. They needed a break from the stress of life and from the chaotic schedule of ministry. Jesus' cousin John has just been killed, right? So he's dealing with that pressure. He's dealing with the pressure of everywhere he goes. There's crowds that are following. People want him to pray for them. People want him to heal them, right? People want Jesus to give them wisdom and dispense great wisdom through his teachings. And so Jesus is like, man, I just need a break. And so he goes into a remote part of the country. Here's where the story picks up. A huge crowd kept following him, Jesus, wherever he went, because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. This is super important. Wherever Jesus went, crowds of people followed. And the reason that crowds of people followed Jesus wasn't because they had great faith in him. It wasn't because they believed that he was God in the flesh. They followed Jesus because of the things that they had heard him say, his teachings, that they felt like, hey, this benefits my life. He dispenses wisdom. But more than that, because of what they saw him do. They followed him because of the miracles. They weren't coming to investigate who Jesus was. They wanted something from him. Now, every parent ought to be able to understand this. Because at some point in our parenting, we look at our kids and we think, they don't want to be around me. They just want something from me. They're not just calling me to talk. And No. They want something from me. And I have seen this evidence with my kids, all three of them, in the last month. My daughter, Caitlin, she texts me about coming up with some financial plan or agreement to let her buy a vehicle from me that I let her drive for free when she was in college. And she says, Dad, I want to buy it from you. Let's come up with a plan. And then at the end of her text, she added this idea. Or you can just hand it over as a graduation present. There it is, right? My daughter, Alyssa, a couple weeks ago, she texts me and she sends me a video of her broken computer screen. And she said, hey, Dad, my birthday is coming up. My son, Jaden, who recently turned 16, he said, Dad, will you buy me a car and allow me to make you car payments? All right? So there are days that I just, as a parent, feel like, no, my kids, I don't think want to be around me, but they all want something from me. It's not that big of a deal, right? I just decided next time we're all together, I'm going to look at them and says, guys, I'm giving you something. Me. I am giving you me. And I know my kids, they're going to say, Dad, you are all we need. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hold hands and we're going to pray and sing songs to Jesus because that's what pastor families do, right? But I'm confident this is how Jesus must have felt. There's a crowd of people and they want something from him. Here's what we read next. Jesus soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him. So he's sitting down, he's talking to his disciples, he looks up and he sees this crowd. He knows why they're looking for them. He knows their motives. He knows they want to get something from him. But instead of running, instead of standing up and saying, guys, I needed a break, just leave me alone for a little bit, he actually is moved with compassion. He has compassion on them. And so, turning to Philip, who is one of his disciples, turning to Philip, he asks, hey, where can we buy bread to feed all these people? Now, this is the epitome of a rhetorical question. Jesus is asking the question to be dramatic because there are thousands of people. And Philip, again, one of his disciples, is apparently really good with math because he starts doing the math in his head. He's taking this question somewhat seriously, and he pulls out his laptop, and he's got this Excel spreadsheet, and he's putting in the data, and he looks up at Jesus and says, the numbers don't work. Here's what we read. Philip replied, even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them. Philip said, let me be clear, we don't have enough money. And if we don't stick to the budget we don't have, we're going to be doing ministry, but it's going to be behind bars. Okay? We got to follow the budget. Now, Jesus, here's the deal. We can't do it. We could go ask Chick-fil-A for a big donation, but it's Sunday, so they're closed. We can't do it. There's nothing we can do, which I think is actually a pretty good response because the very first step in moving forward in a situation that is overwhelming is to acknowledge that we are powerless over the situation. When we admit we're powerless, what happens is we're acknowledging that no amount of trying or practicing or self-control is going to change the situation. That's why every 12-step program starts with admitting we are powerless over this specific thing and our lives have become unmanageable. And so Philip gets step one right, but he misses step two. Step two is about a higher power. Step one is about our natural limitations and what we can't do. Step two is about the supernatural. It's about what God is able to do. It's possible that if Philip would have just paused for a few moments and he would have reflected on the Jewish scriptures and reflected on stories he heard about how God had worked among the people of Israel throughout history, it's possible he would have been more hopeful. But just like all of us, he got caught up in the emotion of the moment, what he's sensing, what he's feeling. Here's what we read next. Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. Hey, Jesus, there's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what good is that with this huge crowd? So Andrew says, hey, Jesus, now Andrew's one of the disciples, right? He says, hey, Jesus, here's the deal. These people were not planning on being here today, right? But you came into the area and rumors started to spread and rumors started to get out. These people have heard stories about you. Some of them have even seen you before and they've seen miracles. So they all want to be around you right now, but they were not planning this and nobody came prepared with a bunch of food. He said, but I have walked through the crowd and I have been talking to people and I was looking for food and I found a little boy's lunch. Now growing up, I gotta tell you, in school, my favorite time of school was lunch. And it wasn't because I always had the greatest lunch. It wasn't like filet mignon, right? It was like usually peanut butter and jelly and an apple, right? And it wasn't because my mom would put letters in there regularly. Dave, you're my favorite child. And, it wasn't because of those things, right? The reason that I love lunch hour was back in the day, we had real lunch boxes. Some of you remember these things, right? They were made of metal, and there was always a story on here, right, that you could just show off, like, check out this lunchbox. And so it was just fun. It was an experience. It had a big thermos in here, and if somebody started giving you a hard time, it was like a weapon. You could throw it at them. It was like a rock, right? And so Andrew stands up and says, I got a lunch here. Thousands of people on a hillside, and the only food that anyone can find is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. Now, I'm guessing, even if you have very little church experience or no church experience, I'm guessing you've heard the story a little bit at some level before, right? A storybook version, maybe a cartoon, or you saw it in a movie. And it's always dramatized in such a pathetic way. It's just like, there's no real emotion. It's just like, Jesus, we have 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And nobody's, come on, in reality, they're panicked. This is a disaster. Thousands of people. And this is all we can find. Here's what we read next. Tell everyone to sit down, Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. Now, in the first century, people were often counted as a family, and so they would count the men. They didn't count women and children. They'd count the men because it represented family. So we're talking 15, 20, maybe 25,000 people. All right, get that in your mind here. Imagine being at Summerfest, right? And you're there to see Jason Aldean or Backstreet Boys, or you're a 21-year-old girl and you're there to see Machine Gun Kelly. But imagine standing up and you're saying, hey, I just want to say, if anybody's hungry, if anybody's thirsty, it's on me. I brought a lunch. I mean, this is how ridiculous it is, right? That's what's happening here. But Jesus takes the kids' lunch. He prays. We don't know what it looked like. We don't know how it unfolded. We don't know everything that took place. But he starts to hand this food to his disciples, and it had already started to multiply, and it becomes this all-you-can-eat buffet, and everyone just keeps eating to their full, and when it's said and done, I mean, there's 12 doggy bags left, or just 12 baskets that Jesus sent home with the disciples. Never underestimate what God is able to do with whatever it is we give him. A little bit of willingness, a little bit of our resources, a little bit of time, a little bit of effort, a little bit of obedience. When we do what we are able to do and trust God to do what only God can do, that's when miracles happen. God is able to multiply whatever it is we trust him with. This church does not exist because Dave Nelson. This church exists because in every season since the day we started, there were people who came along and says, we're going to trust God with some of our resources. We're going to trust God with some of our time. We're going to invest. We're going to volunteer. We're going to serve. We're going to pray. We're going to take what little we have, and it doesn't even feel like a lot of times, but we're going to do it. And then God begins to multiply it because he puts it on the heart of other people. It just happened with our Royal Family Kids Camp. We had people who were able to give different amounts of time, different amounts of resources, different amounts of energy. And we were able to see a camp pulled off for kids in foster care once again. Why? Because that's what God does when we bring him and offer him what we have. Jesus creates so much food in this moment that there's an abundance of it. And that people are just blown away and they start talking among themselves and speculating. Here's what we read. When the people saw him do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, surely he is the prophet we have been expecting. This is huge. It's a miraculous moment. And it's one of these rare moments that everyone seems to shift their focus from what they can get from Jesus to who Jesus is. For just a moment, they're able to take their mind off their appetites and their selfish desires, and they're able to shift their focus from the miraculous sign that they just saw to the person the sign is pointing toward. And as they try to connect the dots, they start to think, well, maybe this is the Messiah that the Jewish prophets have written about. Maybe this is the prophet. Maybe this is the holy man sent from God. Maybe this is the one who's going to deliver us from the bondage of Rome. And in this very dramatic and very emotional moment, the vast majority of the crowd comes to the conclusion that Jesus is from God, and they want to make him their king. They want him to set up an earthly kingdom. They want him to lead the charge in taking back the nation of Israel, which was under the control of the Roman Empire. So imagine this. Jesus is surrounded by thousands of people wanting to make him their king. He's got all the momentum he needs to launch this movement. Jesus knows if we start marching back to Jerusalem, it's going to take us 5, 6, maybe 7 days. All along the way, we're going to pick up more and more people. It is a big moment. But Jesus doesn't want to set up an earthly kingdom. He's going to set up a different type of kingdom. And he knew that the people wanting him to be their king had very little to do with who he was and everything to do with what he could do for them. He was aware of their intentions. He was aware of their motives. Here's what we read next. When Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills by himself. So Jesus goes into the hills to get away from everybody. He says, all right, I've fed them. I'm going to get away by myself. His disciples, they get into a boat, they head to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, and eventually what happens is the next day, Jesus joins them. And there's a whole lot of people who are in that crowd who are fed that when it's the next day, they go looking for Jesus. They can't find him, so they split up. They send out search parties. We got to find Jesus, and eventually they do track him down. And here's what we read. They found him, Jesus, on the other side of the lake and asked, Rabbi, when did you get here? Fascinating. Because they don't really care about how Jesus got there and when Jesus got there. Right? They care about other things. If you've ever wanted something from someone, but you didn't want to appear shallow, so you didn't want to tell them what you really wanted, and you kept your agenda hidden from them, my guess is that when you start hanging out with them and building a friendship or having the conversation, things got a little awkward. Years ago, when I was trying to get Great Lakes Church off the ground, I set up a meeting with a high-level business executive that I knew had just been blessed with some resources. And I set up the meeting, and I said, hey, I want to meet with you, and I want to just pick your brain on leadership. Because I'm starting this church, and they agreed, the CEO, they agreed. They said, okay, Dave, I'll do it. And we go out for coffee, and for 30 minutes, I'm firing away these questions about leadership. But deep down, I really had one motive. I wanted to ask for money. I needed financial help to get going. I just didn't know how to bring it up. And so the meeting's winding down, and this guy was really, really insightful and perceptive. He said, hey, Dave, you gonna ask me for some money? I was like, thank you for making it easy for me, right? It's a great learning for me because, quite honestly, if I have an agenda now, this is what I do. I email people, I text people, say, hey, can I get together with you? I'd like to talk to you about, and I just put it out there. Right? Because what I've learned is most people know when there's a hidden motive. And then there's this weird dance in the conversation that happens. There's awkwardness, right? You got this agenda and you're just kind of looking for the right moment to address it. By the way, if you ever get to spend time with someone of influence or someone who has an abundance of resources, which I'm guessing all of us have that opportunity from time to time, the best thing to do is not ask for something. The best thing to do is just sit there and ask questions and learn. Getting time with the person is way more meaningful than getting something from them. But that hidden motive stuff, that gets awkward, that's what's happening here. These people ask Jesus, hey, when did you get to this part of the Sea of Galilee? They don't care. It's just a conversation starter. And Jesus knows that. He says, come on, you're not interested in when I got here or how I got here. We read, Jesus replied, I tell you the truth. If you want to be with me I tell you the truth, you want to be with me because I fed you. Not because you understood the miraculous signs. You're looking for me because I fed you. It's because of what I did for you. You loved the miracle, but you missed the point of the miracle. You thought that the miracle was the point, but I want you to know I'm the point. And then he looks at the crowd and he says something interesting. He says, but don't be so concerned about perishable things like food. Don't be concerned about how much bread I can produce for you. Come on, eventually it's going to get moldy. Right? Whenever you go to the grocery store, you can buy two types of food, perishable and imperishable. Right? Last week, when my wife was gone volunteering at Royal Family Kids Camp, she knew that if she probably didn't take time to make some things, I'd be eating a lot of cereal because that's just what I do. And don't complain. I just say, this is what I'm going to have. I'm fine with it. So she goes, buys different type of foods. And one of the things she did is she bought a taco kit from Costco. All right? Again, other meals, but this is one of the things she bought. And it's the only thing that she needed to buy because it was like the loaves and fishes. It just kept going and going and going. I ate it every lunch and dinner all week long, from Sunday until Thursday afternoon. And the reason I stopped at Thursday afternoon, because there was still more left, was I started feeling stomach cramps. So I put out an SOS text to my friends, and I said, hey, I've been eating this from Sunday to Thursday. And they said, yeah, we'd probably throw it away by now. It's time to move on. Perishable food, imperishable. Imperishable food is stuff like nuts and seeds and dried fruits, right? And canned goods and Twinkies. Imperishable food, imperishable food is what we need to stock up on in case of an emergency. And Jesus says, hey, do not worry about stuff that is temporary. He continues. He says, spend your energy seeking the eternal life that the Son of Man, that's a reference to himself, that the Son of Man can give you, for God the Father has given me the seal of his approval. Now, Jesus is making a statement, but in reality, he's asking a question. He's asking, do you not realize that this is a sign pointing to who I am? Do you not realize that when I do a miracle like this, it's showing you I have God's approval? Do you not know that I'm speaking on his behalf? Do you not know that I'm speaking the words of God? Do you not know that I'm doing the deeds of God? Do you not understand what's happening in this moment? Do you not understand that 2,000 years from now, people are going to be telling the story, and you are part of the story? You're a part of the movement. You're a part of the revolution. You're part of something way bigger than reclaiming some property in a city that is under the authority of Rome. Do you not understand the gravity of what's happening here? And then Jesus invites them. He says, believe in me. Put your faith in me. And they answer, show us a miraculous sign if you want us to believe in you. What can you do? Are you kidding me? Now, some of the question is fair because it's possible that some of these people were not there the day before, but they had heard what Jesus did, and now they want to see it. But this is either arrogance or ignorance. Many of the people in the crowd had seen Jesus do one of the biggest miracles in the history of the world, but that was yesterday. They wanted to see one today. Do you ever lose sight of what God has done, different points of history, or what God has done in your life, and it impacts how you see and view and think of God in that moment? I do. The crowd says, show us one more miracle and we will believe. I'm guilty of saying stuff like that. Well, God, if only you would do this, I promise you I will follow you. I promise you I will obey you and serve you, but I need you to do this. That's what's happening here. If you've ever heard someone say something along the lines of, you know what, I gave up on faith. I gave up on the church. And the reason I gave up is I wasn't getting anything out of it. That's the same attitude here. I used to give, but I didn't get anything out of it. I used to engage with church services. I used to be involved in volunteering. I used to, but I didn't get anything out of it. That's the attitude here. They're saying, Jesus, you're only as good as your last performance. It's been 24 hours. So they said, Jesus, show us a miraculous sign. And then they gave him examples. Literally said, it gave examples to Jesus of how God had miraculously fed their ancestors in the wilderness many, many decades ago or many hundreds of years ago. They started talking about food again. It's like the only thing on their mind. And then we read, Jesus replied, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never be hungry again. Whoever believes in me will never be thirsty. They say, Jesus, give us a miracle. Give us some bread. Jesus says, I am the miracle. I am the bread of life. I have the power to sustain you. You can look to your job to sustain you. You can look to the approval of others to sustain you. You can look to all the things you can buy to sustain you. You can look to your physical appearance to sustain you. But you're going to find it's perishable. It gets moldy. It's never going to be enough. And Jesus says, I am enough. So, what about you? What about me? Are we just in it for the food? Are we just following Jesus because of what we can get out of him? If so, we have not yet come to grips with who Jesus is. He is the bread of life. He is where we ultimately find identity and meaning and purpose and fulfillment. It's the reason why when we look at the lives of those who decided to follow Jesus in the first century, they went on to change the world. It wasn't the consumers that changed anything. It was those who had been marked by Jesus that shaped Western civilization. It was those who put their faith in Jesus who had their lives reframed. Imagine if every follower of Jesus just decided, hey, for the next month, I'm going to stop asking Jesus for anything, and I'm just going to try to live out what I know he's done for me. I'm going to try to love like he's loved me, show compassion the way he showed compassion to me. I'm going to try to unify the way he's unified. I'm going to try to be the mom or the dad that I know he wants me to be. I'm going to try to be the child, the student that he wants me to be. I hope you're not just in this for the lunch. I hope you're not just in this for, it makes me feel good. I love the community. I love making friends. It feels very social. I hope God lets me into heaven. Because if you're in it for the lunch, you will miss Jesus. And Jesus is ultimately what we need. And we will never have an authentic, meaningful relationship with Jesus if we're always trying to get something from him. We'll always be thinking, Jesus, you are as good as your last performance. I need something new. But just as I offer myself, and he invites us to follow. He invites us to follow. So let's focus on Jesus. Let's follow Jesus. And let's discover what he means when he says, I am the bread of life. That's what this summer is all about. Let me pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for offering us purpose and meaning and identity. And every one of us daily are tempted to find those things in other places. Help us to find it in you. Bring to awareness anytime that our motives are off, when our hearts are shallow, so that we can address it. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we want to experience the life that is in you. In Jesus' name, amen.